Welcome to Good Game Design, show where we talk about good game design, and today I'm digging my own grave because we're going to be talking about Sekiro in a non-positive fashion. And more specifically, we're going to talk about this guy. So, I know, a million articles were written about the Chained Ogre back when the game first launched, and anyone's inability to beat him is thrown at them as proof of being a casual and that they need to get good. But frankly, in my opinion, I think that is kind of ridiculous. And just to cover my own ass, I think it's fine, right, to stick a boss, mini boss, whatever, here, like in this area, in this spot. Just not this one? So why is that? Well, I'm not discrediting that the majority of people who bitch about this game, right, this game in particular, on the broad strokes being too hard, I don't discredit that those people are in fact probably just bad at it. And I want to make clear that that's not what I'm doing here. I'm just trying to explain why this guy, in particular, is poorly designed. Now when I say poorly designed, I don't mean that this boss is actually bad per se, but rather that this just isn't the game he belongs in. A lot of people harp on about the Demon of Hatred being a Bloodborne boss because the vast majority of how you fight him is running around and dodging his attacks. And by the way, he totally is a Bloodborne boss, but that isn't exclusive to just him. In fact, this is actually the biggest problem I have with this game, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Now, the Demon of Hatred is far from the only Bloodborne boss in this game. We've got him, alright, the bulls, and the main man himself, the topic of this little diatribe here, the ogre. Now, there are more, I'm sure, but the bulls and the ogre are, as far as I know, the only mandatory ones, right? The only ones that you have to fight. And it is mind-boggling to me that he is mandatory this early on in the game. So let's stop dancing around the bush and let me get to my point. Okay. So up to this point, you probably fought this tutorial goober, Genichiro, who probably kicked your ass, this guy, and maybe this guy. And if you have fought him, you probably got to Juzo and thought he was too hard, and so you headed back to the main game. And if you, I don't know, managed to beat Juzo, then this probably isn't a problem for you. And just to make this extremely clear, all of these fights, with the possible exception of Juzo, really depending on how you fight him, are based around blocking, deflecting, jumping over their sweeps, and the Makuri counter, which is basically just a deflect you have to unlock. These four things are what make up the vast majority of combat in this game, and hell, they're what the devs and all the promo guys say the whole point of the game is. You know, to feel the swords clash together and whatnot. So why the fuck does this guy appear right the hell out of nowhere and follow basically none of these conventions? What, to teach you about grab attacks? Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about how this guy works. Okay. So the ogre has a handful of moves, some of which can be blocked, although it really isn't that worth it, and we'll get into why pretty quick. And 3 goddamn grabs. Now the grabs come out like lightning, so generally it's best to just dodge everything, because the odds that it's the fast grab are too high to risk the minuscule amount of health you have at this point in the game, and the odds that it isn't the fast grab means that you should dodge to the side, because if it isn't, then dodging back means you'll get grabbed by one of those, typically. So generally you end up just circle strafing around like a complete loser and waiting for him to attack, dodging back to avoid whatever it is, and then swooping in for 2 to 3 attacks before jumping out again. It's exhilarating. Now when I say you don't have much health at this point in the game, that's only half true. Most enemies at this point in the game, and hell, even Gyobu, can kill you in a minimum of 3 hits from full health. Not this guy. If he hits you with any of his grabs, you better pray that you have full health, because anything under 80% will kill you outright, if not throw you over the edge. And so once again, to avoid these grabs, because they're so deadly, And by the way, the rest of his attacks can do nearly half your health, so at most you can only really afford to get hit like 8 times over the course of the entire fight. You have to circle strafe around him at a safe distance and really only go in for pokes. Now, is this a definitive, only best way to kill this guy? No, of course not. People who are more experienced can absolutely just go in, block his attacks, dodge out from under the grabs, and kill him in half the time. But this isn't about how easy things are for veteran players, right? Veteran players can deal with whole heapings of bad design in games they like, just through sheer practice. That doesn't make the design magically passable. And just to be clear, I don't think this guy is terribly difficult. Hell, you're watching me kill him right now on my first try in this run right here. He's far from impossible, and I'm not just whining because I couldn't get past him, which is a common criticism that I see of people who try to talk about this fight in a negative light. Now, I'm complaining that for a game that's all about blocking and deflecting and reacting in a variety of ways to different attacks that your enemies throw out, and generally being highly tactical in a real-time environment, forcing the player to fight an opponent whose dominant strategy is just to run away and poke him twice after he attacks so early on in the game is just asinine. Now, how would I fix him, right? Because I mean, this isn't much of a constructive piece if I just bitch about why he's a bad fight and then move on with my life. And luckily the answer is pretty simple. I just stick this guy, who you fight literally right afterwards, in front of the door instead, and make the ogre an optional fight somewhere else in the area. Hell, you could even just swap him and this guy that you fight earlier and it would still be fine. Obviously you'd have to swap around their health, but that isn't that big of a deal really. Now of course, this doesn't fix the fact that the boss isn't really meant for this game. He's meant for one with actual iframes so you can dodge through his attacks. But that doesn't mean he can't be an optional fight for those who wish to test out their ability with this niche way of fighting in the game, which of course being dodging around and through his attacks. That's mostly why I'm okay with the one you fight later at the bottom of the palace, because you don't actually have to fight him, he's just there if you want to. Oh, and if the excuse for him being there and also being mandatory is that he's a grab tutorial, which seems like the most likely case because this tip pops up right when you start fighting him, wouldn't it make sense to just have grabs mentioned in the first perilous attacks tip that pops up? You know, with the guy that you fight right before this guy? Oh wait, they are. Besides, perilous attacks at the beginning of the game pretty much always provoke a dodge or jump response, so it shouldn't be that hard to assume the player can dodge out of the way of possible incoming grabs instead of just throwing this jank-ass roadblock in their way. Especially because none of them are telegraphed as sweeps, so you can pretty much assume that you're going to want to dodge. Now, if I couldn't change where the ogre appears in the game, fixing the dodging issue is also pretty easy. You just have to make him do less goddamn damage. At this point in the game, you have 2 gourd seeds max, as well as 3 pellets, which can get you killed as they heal over time instead of in one go, and 1 resurrect, 2 if you die once in both phases. So now that might seem like a lot, but when this guy can cleave your entire health bar in one combo or grab, the only thing that really matters is how many resurrects you have left, which is always either 1 or 0. So just make him do less damage. To bring another game into this, one of the reasons I love Orphan of Kos so much is because if you have 40 vitality, which, let's be honest, the only reason not to have 40 vitality by the time you fight Orphan is if you're speedrunning or deliberately doing a challenge run. He physically cannot kill you if you have 40 vitality without hitting you at least 3 times. And on top of that, if you visceral attack him with a blood rapture rune in his first phase, you get all your health back without having to expend any of your healing materials. What this means is that in what many people consider to be the hardest Souls game FromSoft ever made, and in what many people consider to be the hardest boss they ever made, you have essentially infinite resources to fight the first phase, which is fucking great. It actually feels like a battle. He hits you a couple times, you hit him a couple times, you come together, you split apart, there's flurries, the tide changes during the battle. It's like, you know, combat. Instead, with the ogre, you just run around him in circles like a prissy baby and pray you never get hit, which is super fun. So I guess to end this out, this fight ain't good. But there are a lot of fights in this game that really are, and I'd consider almost every other mandatory fight to be brilliant, with the exception of the bulls, who have many of the same problems as the ogre. Even if I do suck at most of them, they are still good fights. They're well made, and they make sense within the context of the game. And the moral to the story, I suppose, for any aspiring game designers out there, is to take stock of what your game really is about, and make sure you tailor it to that experience. There's nothing wrong with making a hard game. My favorite game of all time is still Bloodborne, but trying to twist it into something it isn't for the sake of an interesting idea like the ogre or the beta chaos, etc., is almost never worth it, because at best you'll end up with a community that accepts bad design and therefore allows its continued existence, and at worst you won't have a community, just a bunch of pissed off Steam reviews. So, thanks for watching. I hope I didn't come off as too whiny or condescending in this video, as this is my first and I'm still trying to, work things out. I have a lot of fish to fry with this game, but I don't want to burn everyone out on ranting about this one in particular, so if you're interested in more of this, let me know. Of course, I have other games that I want to talk about, and I think in the next one of these, I'll tackle the biggest of them all. Because why burn only one bridge when you can burn them all right out of the gate?